All right, we are live. After a short medium break, we're back on the podcast episodes. Today, we have Dr. Marcora and Coach Sam Smith, as usual. We're going to talk about some research, talk about some CrossFit. We're gonna pick the big brain and hopefully learn a lot. This is kind of a selfish podcast because Coach Sam Smith and I we're extremely grateful that you came on. So yeah, we're super excited. We're going to hopefully start with a little bit of CrossFit. I've noticed recently you've been getting into CrossFit, and I see you on comments on YouTube, and just have noticed you expressing some interest in it. And then I saw you took your L1. I was like, man, it'd be so cool if we could get him on the podcast one day. And then you comment on our YouTube channel, and I was like, wow, I immediately screenshotted it. I send it to Sam, Coach Sam, and I'm like, how should I respond to this? Whatever. He's like, we'll think of something. We respond, and then you're in our live chat. And we're like, hey, we would love for you to come on. You were like, anytime. So we were not going to squander the opportunity. So we're both really thankful you came on. What people might not know, if you do know, pronounced in research, but you are the 127th fittest man in Italy in the 55 to 59 age group. So congrats on that.
It's not that difficult, but anyway, yeah. No.
I think you should be proud of it. So how was the Open? Did you enjoyed it?
Well, it was the first time. Yeah, I like the concept. Although there's been some controversies, right, recently about the whole thing. But I mean, the concept to do this online competition also gives you an opportunity to measure your fitness against other people. So yeah, no, it's a very cool idea. One of the things I really like about CrossFit, I like many things. That's why I'm interested, but I don't like some other things. But maybe we'll get to that.
Oh, we're gonna get to it, I think. So me and Sam Smith we've both taken the L1. We took it. I took mine about 11 years ago, probably pretty similar to Sam. And I'm sure it's pretty similar from what we've seen. But what was your experience with the L1? Did you like it? Did you?
Yeah, it was good. It was like weirdly around an holiday in Italy. It was the very beginning of January. There's we call it Befana Epiphany, I think you call it. It's a Catholic holiday. So actually there were not many people. So we had a very good interaction with the two coaches, which they were great. And both of them actually also they were also coming from sports science. So here in Italy, Milano, where I studied myself. So yeah, no, it was a good experience overall. Yeah, again, it's just I think in general is the idea that in a couple of days you can become a coach and open a gym by yourself is a bit ridiculous for somebody that like me decided to dedicate years of university studies, because I'm still now, I don't think I'm fully prepared. So the problem that if you only do 2 days, sometimes maybe you are overconfident about it. So, but yeah, no, it was a good experience overall. So I would like maybe in the future to do level 2 as well.
Do you remember who the coaches were?
There were no, the name, no, not now, but 2 Italian red shirts, I think you call them, the staff. Yeah. No,
I was just going to say, on that note, could you share your education and background? Because some of our
yes.
They probably don't understand where you're coming from.
Yes. So I think I always say to my students here in Italy that I think I was lucky that my first degree was in physical education rather than sport and exercise sciences, because at that time in Italy there was no other thing. There was only physical education. Because compared to some of the degrees that there are now, it also gave us a lot of practical experience and knowledge about all sorts of things, from strength conditioning and working with kids or adolescents and stuff. So I think there was plus all the sciences, by the way. We had a lot of sciences, anatomy, physiology, etc. So that was my first degree. Then I worked for a couple of years in the fitness industry. I'm talking, guys, I'm old, so I'm talking about late 80s, early 90s. So full CrossFit didn't exist then. Full-on bodybuilding, fitness, cardio, running, the kind of things that CrossFitters didn't like. Also military service, because at that time in the army, so I served in the army for 1 year. And then I wanted to study more, and as I said, there was no opportunity in Italy. It didn't exist a postgraduate degree, so I actually did my master's degree in sport and exercise sciences. It was called specialization in human performance at the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, which again, I was really actually glad to go there because it was a former physical education college, actually, origin of the University of Wisconsin system. So there was a very strong history tradition of physical education, sport and exercise science. So I really enjoy my time in the United States. Then I went back to Italy, to Rome, because I was basically one of the few, I'm talking about, you could count them on one hand, people who had a sports science degree. So I could find very easily a job at the Olympic Committee in Rome. So I worked there for 1 year, working with the Italian Olympic level athletes, like rowers, skaters, track and field, etc., volleyball. But then I wanted to do research, doing my master dissertation, I really got into research. So I searched for an opportunity, and luckily I won a studentship to do my PhD at the University of Wales in the UK, where I did my PhD. My PhD was more clinical exercise physiology, was about preventing muscle wasting in rheumatoid arthritis patients. And then I did also clinical research on patients doing dialysis. So we did a high-intensity interval training regimen during dialysis with these patients. At the same time, I was a consultant of the best in those days. We're talking about 90s, early 2000s, of MAPEI professional cycling team, which was the top team and the professional team in the world in those days. But then it was about, let me think, 2006, my first sabbatical, I decided to do it in the School of Psychology, because I noticed that fatigue, my main training was scientific one, was in physiology. Although I did, of course, biomechanics, psychology as well, but the concentration has always been physiology. But I realized that to understand fatigue, which I'm sure we'll get into it, it's not enough to study the physiological aspects, but we need to study the psychological aspects as well. So that's where my research then went into, in the interdisciplinary research about fatigue. Although I mainly work with endurance athletes, soldiers, a little bit of research also on football, being in Italy, of course, football meaning soccer and kicking the ball, not CrossFit. CrossFit is just a very recent interest of mine from an old man trying to get a bit fitter. and also, but yeah, I really got into it. I really got passionate about it. So here I am talking to you guys. Because actually, I was saying to Roman earlier before getting on, in preparation, because I decided I wanted to do a course for our students, an undergraduate. I call it functional cross training, because we cannot call it CrossFit for copyright reasons. And so that's how I got to know you guys. I looked around, YouTube, websites, just to have an idea of the culture, the methodology. And of course, I found OPEX, which I really like, because to me is the scientific version of CrossFit and strength conditioning more in general. So I really like the content, and that's how I got to know you guys.
Awesome. One question with the research on the arthritis, were you guys doing like pharmacology intervention, or was it
actually my PhD, was three interventions. One, of course, has to be high intensity resistant training, which at that time it was like a no. I mean, these people have, it's a systemic disease, autoimmune disease. It affects all organs. but the primary organ that is affected is the joints. So these people are swollen, painful, and destroy joints. So it's not. So they said, oh no, do easy, light intensity exercise. But we proved that you can do it. Obviously, well designed and program. I was supervising them as well in the gym. That you can do high intensity resistance training, of course, that induced hypertrophy and improvement, functional improvement in strength. But also, we did the trial on an amino acids mixture was glutamine, HMB, and leucine. And then a trial at that time was just out. Now is a staple in the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, which is anti-TNF. TNF is a pro-inflammatory cytokines, and basically it's a drug that blocks the effects of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is involved in the joint inflammation, but also it induces protein catabolism. Basically, it tells the muscle to destroy themselves to liberate amino acids for other functions, for the immune function. So by blocking it, you can have a good effect on the joint inflammation, but we're interested in the effects on muscle mass as well, compared to standard drugs. So yeah, drugs, nutrition, and training.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I had asked because in some searching of my own, I found that's where a lot of SARMs came into play. I don't know if you're familiar with those drugs, but they're abused a little bit. But I know they were researched in a lot of muscle wasting and cancer. That was the ideal purpose of the drugs.
But all these are also the anabolic steroids. Actually, we did a couple of trials with nandrolone in rheumatoid arthritis and also patients with chronic kidney disease.
Okay.
Yeah, because the nandrolone was developed for muscle wasting, but also for anemia, because in those days we didn't have EPO, so it was a way to increase production of red blood cells in people that have chronic anemia. They're all drugs that have a prescription.
Yeah. Nandrolone, the famous boxer, just got popped for failed nandrolone test. Ryan Garcia.
Although I've just seen that famous weightlifters got caught for EPO, which you would think for cyclists, fair enough. For weightlifting, that's interesting.
Maybe they know something we don't.
Or big placebo effect. I mean, even elite athletes, a lot of the things they do, they're not effective physiologically, I think. But psychologically, yes, placebo effect, I think, has a big as a bigger role in a lot of things the athletes do, especially before the game, before competition.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. Maybe this will allow us to kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. But I'm curious, when you first saw CrossFit, whether you watched it or read about it, what did you think about when you saw that discipline or way of exercising? What came to your mind? I know it's pretty open.
So my first contact was when I was in the UK through TV. So it was still at their end, so it must have been ages ago. When was last time? I mean, it was early 2000s, I think, because I was I think I was still a PhD student. So I remember watching it and that's interesting, but I didn't really get into it then. I was doing my usual kind of more traditional strength training and aerobic activity, like traditional stuff. But I got into it more recently, of course, because of I bought a house and I wanted to build. I didn't want to go to the gym anymore. I'm training with my wife, so the CrossFit, I got into it because it gives you the opportunity to do a lot of things with not so much equipment. So without, I mean, I got the bag then, and I got a lot of equipment anyway. But of course, nothing close to to what you guys call global gym. Global gym. It took me a while to understand what you guys meant. What did I thought they were meant referred to World Gym, but then I understand it's from a movie with Ben Stiller, something like that. I didn't know that. From outside the United States,
dodgeball.
Okay, doesn't make much sense. So so that was a practical thing. Plus, I guess being old and you get, middle age crisis kind of thing. What I liked is because it made me feel a little bit like the feelings, the sensation, purely psychological, no? It's like when you do sport training. By the way, I'm a very weird Italian, guys. I forgot to tell you. My main sport, okay, I did swimming when I was little because in Italy we all do that, basketball, but my main sport was American football.
Nice.
I was lucky to. I was born in a town where there was the second team ever in Italy. The first one was 1975 in Milano, and was Rhinos Milano. And in my town, the team was called Frogs. It was 1977. So I was actually second generation.
Wow.
I started to play when I was 14. So that was linebacker. I was.
Nice.
Yeah, that's my. I'm a weird Italian. You asked me about football and stuff. I mean, I did a consultancy for Arsenal, and I didn't even know who the coach was, and I didn't recognize him. But American football. So it made me feel a little bit like, that kind of feelings when you did also the military. That kind of. So I guess it made me feel a bit younger because I had the same feelings that I had when I was playing football and in the military. And of course, it's also efficient, so you can get, a good, not optimal. We all know that, but a good cardiovascular metabolic stimulus, and also at the same time a good muscular one. Because now I'm not looking for optimal training, just trying to maintain and improve a little bit my function, and in a very time efficient way. So that's how it started, really, a practical consideration.
And what do you think physiologically when you were like watching it and then you were doing it? Like, because it's so different than running or cycling.
And that's why, yeah, I'm interested maybe to get. I hope now that I did this semester is the first time that we do this cross training module, and so I hope some students, actually there is already one, maybe start to do some research. Because it's a very strange combination. Having said that, as I was saying before, I said I did CrossFit when I was in middle school because in physical education classes, because we did a lot of apart from the barbells because we didn't have any, but we did a lot of running, ropes. You see those. Yeah, you can see those reels, old school physical education. Yeah, that was my physical education. Very kind of military. So yeah, a lot of circuit training. So, and there is a little bit of research on that, but not obviously not as much as the other modalities. And yeah, it's a very interesting combination of, because you have situation in which it's kind of closer to endurance, so it could be limited by, maybe, I'm sure we'll get to that, to more from your perceptual kind of motivational factors. But at the same time, you also have the local muscle fatigue, which, of course, in those specific situations, there is a physiological limitation. You cannot produce the force or the power. So so that's, from a physiological point of view, it's very interesting. The other thing that is of interest to me, which I think could have application also for the competitors, is I think that especially the respiratory. A lot of people in CrossFit talk about the heart rate. I mean, unless you keep looking at your heart rate monitor all the time, you don't feel the heart rate. I think what they mean really is what we feel is the ventilation, especially breathing rate. That's what seems to affect also the perception of effort and fatigue during exercise. So I think that the ventilation is kind of exaggerated compared to the metabolic requirements, but I would like to do some research on that. And I think it's because of how ventilation is regulated from the central nervous system, and the combination of these alternating quite strong muscle contractions in a continuous way as a weird kind of fools the central nervous system and induces this ventilation, which is in excess of what I think metabolic is required. But I haven't done it. It's a bit of an hypothesis, working hypothesis that I would like to explore with further research in the future.
Could you expand on the tie-in between respiration rate and perception of effort? Because I think that's super interesting.
Yeah,
Because it gets maximized in CrossFit really quickly. Because, like you said, there's local muscle fatigue, and if that's a primary driver of the fatigue, then that can almost like go up really quick. Whereas if it's more enduring, then that might be a more gradual increase. But just curious to hear you expand on that a bit.
Yes. Sorry, the first question was the
connection.
The breathing. Yeah. So we didn't do studies in CrossFit, but we did studies in with, for example, cyclists with time trials of different intensity, and also intermittent exercise as well. And we looked at heart rate, oxygen consumption, so cardiovascular stuff, oxygen consumption, metabolic stuff, and lactate. Ventilation, which is the product, as you guys know, of breathing frequency, and tidal volume, which is the amount of air that is expired in one breath. And of all these variables, the one that is consistently correlated across all these different kind of activities is breathing frequency. Not, I mean, the others are also correlated, but the one that is most strongly correlated is breathing frequency, even more than overall ventilation. So that's also something that is interesting. And the thinking is, we're also publishing, some in Journal of Physiology, because as you know, when ventilation is stimulated both by metabolic signals, so things like lactic acid build-up, changes in the hemogases, not so much, but a little bit. So metabolic signals. So we respond, of course, to metabolic requirements by increasing ventilation. But actually, and this traditionally, we think that that's the main stimulus. But now we know that another very important stimulus is so-called central motor drive. So when we send signals from the brain to the muscle, and of course, during CrossFit, that's a big difference with endurance activities. CrossFit, Metcons, that kind of stuff. Okay, obviously CrossFit, you do all sorts of things, but tradition, the world people think about. You send each movement is more intense than the cyclical running, cycling, or swimming. You alternate, and so you can keep going because you guys, also me now, you alternate the movement. But each single movement that you do it requires a lot of central motor drive, because even the ones that you can do many reps is way more higher percentage compared to running. I mean, running, I don't know, or cycling, if you go slow, it's 60 RPM, I mean, it's like 60 repetitions. You never do 60 repetition in a set in CrossFit, right? I mean, so the contraction is quite strong, even if it's a muscle, but it's quite strong. So it requires a lot of motor drive. And now we know that this motor drive stimulates ventilation. Probably is the primary driver of ventilation, more than the metabolic. And that's why I think the ventilation may be kind of exaggerated compared to the metabolic requirements of CrossFit.
Okay.
And the key is that this breathing frequency, which I don't know why people, I think they keep talking about heart rate. Now nobody can perceive heart rate. If we could perceive heart rate, we wouldn't have the heart rate monitors, guys. I mean, we cannot. It's not something they really feel much. It's the breathing frequency that we feel a lot as a sensation. Of course, the local effort in the limbs as well. But this is a very key component of overall perception of effort, which is a limiting factor for performance.
Okay.
Did you have something, Roman?
I was so you're saying that from your research, the breathing frequency was a better determinant of a higher perception of effort versus the other things.
I would call it correlate, because actually it's kind of a determinant, but it's also is a bidirectional, is also an effect, because basically what we perceive as effort, that's another thing that a lot of people maybe they're not into science. Even people are into science. It took me a while to convince. Now I think most people are convinced, but in the beginning, no. A lot of people think that the perception of effort, of fatigue, comes from the body, signals from the body to the brain. That's true for feelings like, for example, what we call exercise-induced muscle pain. So the burning, aching sensation when you do very high intensity exercise or prolonged isometric contraction. That we know what you're talking about. But that's not perception of effort. I mean, if I put a cuff around your arm and stop your circulation, after a while it's going to burn. You're not going to feel any effort. You're going to feel the burn, because that's a sensation related to the buildup of metabolites and also potassium, other stuff in the muscle related to high intensity exercise, such as the one that we do in CrossFit. However, the perception of effort is actually reflects something else, reflects a central motor drive. So when we send the signals to the muscles, but also to the respiratory muscle, let's not forget the respiratory muscles are skeletal muscles. Okay, they have a peculiar control, but they are skeletal muscle like the biceps. They have this involuntary control, but they need motor signals to get activated. And so these motor signals to the limbs and to the respiratory muscles are at a conscious level, they appear as feeling of effort. And of course, that's also related to fatigue, because I don't know, if you pace yourself properly, like you guys at OPEX really stress people on, which is very good. But even if you pace yourself well at the beginning, it feels less effort than at the end. So at the end is the same thing, the same output is more effortful. That's what I call perceived fatigue, is the fact that you require more perceived effort to do the same work, or vice versa, less work for the same perceived effort, which is exactly the same thing. And of course, this can have a massive effect on performance, especially for sure in endurance kind of activities. In the activities like a CrossFit, I think is a little bit more complex. Because what we found was surprising, because also for endurance performance, we thought that it was limited by muscle fatigue. I'm talking about running, cycling, standard, what you call it, monostructural, I call it cyclical activities. We thought that people could not maintain a certain pace or stopped because of muscle fatigue, because they couldn't produce the speed or the power output, literally. But now I started this trend, and then also other people have confirmed that when we feel exhausted during this kind of endurance activities and we stop, we feel we have nothing left, zero left. We have a lot left, both from a neuromuscular point of view and also from a metabolic point of view. So there is a study from a colleague who used to work in Copenhagen, when they do a lot of biopsies. They do biopsy like taking lactate with lactate analyzer. And they did a study, so the incremental test to go to the max, the VO2 max test. So you keep increasing the intensity until you cannot keep it anymore. They did a muscle biopsy. They measured how much energy was left in the muscles at the point of exhaustion, when you feel, forget it, I cannot go for another 5 seconds. And they calculated that they could, from a bioenergetic point of view, they could keep going for 7 to 8 minutes at VO2 max. So that's from a bioenergetic point of view. I did studies where I shown that from a neuromuscular point of view, there is also a big reserve. So in endurance activities, I think we are kind of, now there is a big consensus that maybe not, for me, is the only factor. Maybe other people say is a very important factor, but regardless, I think nobody now is going to say that perception of effort is a key limiting factor in endurance performance. In CrossFit, of course, if you do endurance events like you do, guys, it's going to be super limiting there. how it affects performance in a Metcon kind of thing, it's more complicated. We can talk about that
Yes,
if you want.
especially if you had movements where the tension of the contraction is really high, so you can't keep going and going like you can on a bike. Like fatigue will be reached far before you want to push it.
Exactly. I would say that because a lot of people don't realize, because when we normalize muscle kind of, weightlifting or even gymnastic, we think in terms of percentage of 1 RM or maximal. But during even high intensity endurance, because we normalize it to VO2 mass, so we think, oh, we're going 90%, we're going 80%. It's not the same from a muscle point of view. It's not the same as 80% or 90% of your maximum force. Even at VO2 max, which is a very high endurance intensity, you are maybe 20% of your maximal force. I mean, it's a very submaximal. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. Hundreds of them It's very submaximal. Nothing close to the kind of intensity that we do when we do gymnastic or weightlifting movement. So I think anything above, well, it's difficult to say, but because to be honest, in the lab, in humans, we do involuntary contraction. To be honest, I've never seen more than 30% strength or power loss in a human. I'm talking about maximal power as a measure of fatigue. As you know, people measure fatigue in the lab as a reduction in maximal force or power induced by exercise. So, but in the lab, you can go down to 50% with isolated cells. So let's say anything above 50% of 1 RM, I think can be limited by muscle fatigue directly. However, I think the perception of effort is going to have a massive role when you take decisions, because that's something I noticed is when you decide, okay, should I rest a little bit more or less between the movements? Should I break or not? These kind of things that can obviously affect performance. Those are not, you do those before you reach the limit. You're not getting stuck on a muscle up or whatever. You anticipate based on your experience, based on how you feel, so perception of effort, and you take decisions about your performance. And I think that's, like any decision, is a psychological phenomenon, taking decisions, and it's going to be affected a lot by how you feel, and especially in terms of perception of effort, including, the breathing and stuff. So I think even in Metcons, where you have an important muscular component, perception of effort is going to have an effect. In fact, it'd be nice to do some study where you reduce it independently of your physiology and see whether the Metcon performance is improved. Because for sure, in endurance performance, we know physiologically, you are, without changing anything in your physiology, if I reduce your perception of effort, I will improve your performance. Or if I increase your perception of effort, I will reduce your performance. But we've done all those studies in endurance, like running, cycling, high intensity. I mean, most of the studies I do in cycling, for example, are the duration they go to exhaustion within 10-15 minutes. I mean, it's not, it's kind of relevant in a way to CrossFit. It's very high intensity endurance activity, and if you change perception of effort, you can change the performance regardless of modification in physiology. Of course, if you modify the physiology, you're more fit, you're going to feel less effort for even power up. The reason why Kipchoge can run for 2 hours at 21 kilometers per hour, which is miles per hour, how much is it?
13.
And me 30 seconds is because he feels on a 0 to 10 RP. He feels at the beginning he feels 3. I feel 9 as soon as I step on the treadmill. And the main reason is because he's fit and I'm not, and he's genetically gifted and I'm not. So perception of effort obviously is influenced by the physiology a lot, but it's a psychological phenomenon. So you can also influence it psychologically, not only physiologically. That, I think, can open a lot of new strategies to improve performance, even in CrossFit. Although I don't have the experiments to back that up, yet. Maybe in the future, I hope.
Yeah. Oh, so a couple of things there, maybe because that's top of mind. Could you expand on how the psychological inputs can influence perception of effort? Because I think people don't connect that to outcomes in the gym, where if they go in with a higher perception of effort because of things outside of training, it's harder for them to realize, oh yeah, that's going to influence my performance. And so I think there's a gap there in people getting a little bit aware of that.
Yes. So the simple thing is that you can have more or less perception of effort based on the intensity of the nervous signals that arise, that originates this feeling. So, for example, obviously, if I'm fitter, if I'm stronger, lifting 50 kilos thruster is going to feel much easier than if you're not strong. Okay, and that's also very important, and it explains, for example, why getting fitter or getting muscle fatigue getting fitter reduces your perception of effort, improves performance. Muscle fatigue increases perception of effort, reduces your performance. So we can all understand that. The thing is that the perception is not just about the intensity of the signal. It's also about how the brain processes this signal. There is a step in between the signal and what our consciousness, our feeling, in this case of perception of effort. And there is a lot of processing, both subconscious, kind of physiological, and also conscious. And they've done a lot of experiments actually that prove this experimentally. Because in sports psychology, most social sciences kind of approach, they did a lot of correlation, talking to people, questionnaires, but they never really done much of experiments. So I came more from a physiological background, so I really got into, I test things with experimental manipulations. So I give you two examples. One is very relevant, I think, to the example that you just made. Mental fatigue. A lot of people go to the gym maybe late and they are tired because they've done intellectual work for a long time. And so there are other things that can cause mental fatigue in athletes, for example. But let's say a normal person, the main cause of mental fatigue would be, doing a lot of work at the desk, intellectual work. That, for example, increases your perception of effort and reduces your literally, because work capacity is not something that Glassman invented. I mean, the first time I heard about it was from Astrand, and it was published in my textbook of physiology, was published in 1977. So work capacity is not a new concept, but mental fatigue can reduce work capacity, measure objectively with this high intensity endurance test, and that's just because it increases perception of effort. Physiologically, we measure cardiac output, metabolism, ventilation, muscles, everything, nothing changes. The only thing that changes is perception of effort, but because of that, there is a reduction in work capacity. Vice versa, if I reduce your perception of effort, and you can do it with psychological manipulation. For example, we did a motivational self-talk, but let's give an example. One of the features, if you like, of CrossFit, verbal encouragement. People shouting at you, encouraging you, is one of the most powerful psychological manipulation in the literature. You know what I mean? It's one of the things that reduces your perception of effort, increases your work capacity quite a lot, and that's both a good thing because in a class you're going to push yourself a little bit more. Can also be a bad thing because sometimes maybe you shouldn't push yourself too much. So anyway, pros and cons, but for sure, but there are also other techniques, including, I think the interesting thing is, again, linked to what you were saying, we did a study where it's called non-unconscious visual cues, but let's say subliminal messages. Those beer is the thing that Coca-Cola flashing popcorn and Coke during the movies, and people didn't realize, and then they go out. Yeah, it's now banned because actually it's a legitimate psychological manipulation. So we did that. We flashed, for example, in happy faces in one condition and sad faces in another condition. And because the brain is highly, human brain especially, is highly sensitive to faces because we read emotions, it's for social communications. Some people say we have a specific area to interpret the facial expression of other people. But in this case, they didn't see the face. It was flashed so quickly and in a way that was totally non-conscious. The brain perceived it, but they were not aware of that. And this was enough to either with a sad face to increase the perception of effort, reduce performance, and with the happy face, reduce perception of effort and increase work capacity. So even things you're not aware of, not just, oh, I'm tired, or I'm in a bad mood, I had a problem with my girlfriend or with the boss at work and stuff. Obviously, those things are important that can affect your performance. But also things you're not aware of, completely unaware of, can affect your performance. We proved that experimentally. So it can be seen as a negative thing, but also as a positive thing, because I think it gives athletes and coaches something new on the top of what we already do with training, with nutrition, etc., to work on, because it goes through different mechanisms, so it's additive. Is okay, I should train, I should have a good nutrition, everything, but on the top of that, I can use, for example, some psychological techniques to improve my performance further, something extra that can give me a competitive advantage. I think that's an important message.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think it's a nice segue. Sorry, Roman, I'm taking over a little.
I'm loving it.
I'm looking at this book, which I've mentioned to my audience before, and one of the, because I think this is you wrote the first, or you had the first paper in there on psychobiology of fatigue.
Yeah.
In one of your studies, you talked about the interaction between perception of effort and potential motivation, and how motivation influences perception of effort. So that might be a nice segue now that people have a better understanding of how mental fatigue can influence perception of effort, which can influence your work capacity, but also as a secondary piece, how your motivation, of course, influences perception of effort.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for this question. Sometimes people misinterpret it to be my model, which is called the psychobiological model.
No, that's not different.
Yeah, because there are two different things: motivation, perception of effort. They interact to determine work capacity. Again, the evidence is about endurance performance. Right? For example, if you do 1RM, that's a different story. Okay, the strength and single, high jump, something like that is not. But endurance performance, and I think, although I don't have the data, I think also CrossFit should be influenced by this perception of effort, and potential motivation interact. I think the concept of potential motivation is important more for kind of, for example, work that you do when you work with clients during training. During competition, if it's an important competition, most people, because motivation is a construct that means many things. Potential motivation comes from a specific kind of motivation. It's the maximal effort that you're willing to exert in order to succeed in the task. I don't think there is everybody involved in a serious competition is willing to exert a maximal effort to do well in the competition. So what distinguish? It's a bit of a side effect of a very nice book, which is called How Bad Do You Want It by Matt Fitzgerald, who also mentioned a lot of my research. But it's not how bad do you want it. I think everybody, there may be a situation where you don't want it, but I think what he was referring to is when you get to the point where you have this massive feeling of effort and, that make you feel that you are not able to continue, there may be some people that they have the extra, but it's not motivation. I think it's more how they interpret that feeling that make them able to go a little bit further. But the main reason why I'm sure if somebody tell me, oh, Sam, if you run the marathon in less than 2 hours, I'll give you $1 million. I'm sure I'm gonna be willing to exert the maximal effort. But the reason why I'm not gonna do it is because when I run at 13 miles per hour, my perception of effort is 10 after 30 seconds. So perception of effort is the main distinguisher in competitive situation, not how bad do you want it. In training, that's a different story. Of course, motivation, even in elite athletes. I mean, this idea that also a bit of a CrossFit thing. Every time you go into the class, you go full send. Also, I mean, also to be honest, most intelligent people in CrossFit do not think like that anymore. But originally, that was the idea. No, you should go full send. That doesn't happen. Even elite athletes don't. I mean, we all know people that study training properly. We all know that you have to cycle intensity for a core, even in an Olympic athlete. So unless the average CrossFitter is better than Olympic athlete, I think it applies to them as well. And so there, of course, motivation to maintain motivation, which is going to allow you to exert effort during training, because it may limit how much effort you exert during training. That's where the potential motivation can have an effect on the athlete during training rather than in competition, because that's where it fluctuates. But of course, perceptual effort can have a negative or positive effect during competition, but also during training. So if I train all the time in a mentally fatigued condition, for example, for certain things could be a good thing because it makes you more resistant to mental fatigue. But then if you train always in that way, you're not going to have the intensity to stimulate the muscle, the cardiorespiratory system, the metabolism. So you need to also to try to avoid mental fatigue to be able to push during training and get the stimulus. So that's where potential motivation is with the clients and also with the athletes during training, not during competition.
Yeah, no, that's, and because I've talked to clients about that before, how you won't be as motivated as you are on the day of the race, and so you'll give everything. Once you're past the race, motivation's gonna go way down, especially if you have a long time till the race. And so as like from a training design,
that's great. That's a great thing that you just said, because there are three main components of potential motivation. I think also this has practical application, so that's why I'm keen to expand on this. One is the reward, so the reward value. So let's say somebody that does CrossFit, fitness in general for health. Everybody value health. Who doesn't value avoiding coronary heart disease, diabetes, and live longer and disability in the old age? Need, again, everybody who doesn't need to be healthy. So, and that's why a lot of people think, oh, you just tell people that if they do physical activity, regular training, they're gonna reduce their risk of developing diabetes by 35%, 40%. That's super motivational. But it's not. We know that. It's not super motivational otherwise, because everybody knows that, and not everybody does physical activity. So the reason is exactly what you said. It's called contingency, or instrumentality of the task. So is how contingent, how immediate is the reward to the task. So you're asking somebody to, if you go purely on with the health message, which also I think is strong in CrossFit, right? Especially, I mean, apart from the athletes, is this thing about, being able to, they always say that, to lift your nephew when you're old, something like that. That seems super motivation, but it's not, because you have to train now, you have to exert now, but the reward is maybe in 10, 20, 30 years time. So it's distant. And on the top of that, it's not like, oh, if you do exercise 100%, you're not going to have a coronary heart disease. No, you may still have it, because it reduces the risk. So the contingency of doing training, exercise, CrossFit, or any kind of exercise, physical activity now, purely from a health point of view, is not as motivation as people think. And that's because exactly what you said, the contingency of the effort, the task, the effort I have to put in the task, which is training now, and the reward. So I think, and also maybe that's why CrossFit, that's one of the positive things about CrossFit, which, to be honest, could be done also in any kind of fitness. If people go for aesthetic reasons, in normal gyms, especially in the US, I notice you just go there and there's nobody there. And in Italy, it's different. They have instructors also in the global gyms. It's a bit different. But if you do test, for example, the training itself becomes a way to test yourself, right? So you do the girls, you do so then their motivation is much, so the training is much more contingent to the reward, because the reward is increasing performance, which you can achieve, okay, in the beginners, maybe even in a few weeks. You can measure improvements in fitness, in a measure of, whatever measure of fitness, including the CrossFit workouts, the benchmark. So measuring fitness regularly and linking it to training, like you guys do. I think one of the courses I bought was from assessment to prescription, something like that. Yeah. So you link a lot the assessments with the prescription, and also for the clients, right? So the short to medium term goals that are achievable, of course, but the main thing has to be achievable in a relatively short period of time compared to the general health goals, which seems much more important, but the contingency is in a behavioral economics called discounting. The longer the more distant is the reward, the discount, I mean, is really bad. I mean, things that, and that's why a lot of people screw up. For example, the short-term reward of, that's me, having a cake, it's much, because it's immediate, it's way more motivation, in this case, in the wrong direction, than, okay, not having a large belly in at the end of the year. So it's something that, but the coaches can do, and I think CrossFit does well with the intrinsic measurement of performance.
And there's so many movements and disciplines inside of it. So like, there's so many different gymnastics that you can get better at. So it, if one's stalling or you've made good progress, you move on to the next one, or there's weightlifting,
Exactly.
or there's cyclical elements. So you kind of, you're never bored. So for those that don't have that delayed gratification trait, and who are like a squirrel, it's like, I got to go to this, then there is more enjoyment to be had in the training process inside of a CrossFit idea. But that's great. I appreciate you expanding on that, because I think people don't, or at least in the culture, it seems like people think motivation is something you can like slap yourself on the face and you can go do it, where there's actually like there's variables involved that will influence the amplitude of it. And learning how to leverage that is powerful. So it's definitely a less known topic, I think.
But I think the learning the skills, that's another thing that CrossFit compared to the regular. That's motivation, because you learn. That, for example, that was one of my things also why I like CrossFit, because it put me back to being gymnastic. When I did my physical education degree, we did 4 hours of gymnastic every week during the semester for 3 years. And so in order to enter in the physical education degree, you have to do a test: track and field, swimming, basketball, volleyball, and gymnastic. I mean, to enter, so you had to be able to do handstand walks to enter. So I had to train to enter. And then, of course, we developed. And to me, especially because I'm a big guy, linebacker, 100+ kilos, and it was, for me, it was really learning the skills. It was hard as hell, but it gave me a lot of satisfaction, because, sometimes it's a little thing, but it can happen, within the same session even. I mean, how super contingent that is to the training side. You got immediate reward sometime, especially at the beginning, from the training session. So it seems a little thing, but because it's so contingent to what you're doing at that specific time, it's super motivational, much more than a lot of other things that we tend to sell to the public. Sometimes I guess maybe CrossFit doesn't even realize, because they keep saying about this playing with kids in the old age. I think it's
Yeah, they got to change their angle, learning skills and developing your physical prowess.
I mean, they do that, but I think they undersell it. Put it this way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I agree. Are we? Is it time to wrap up, Roman? What's our?
I'm okay if everyone else is. We can always do a part 2 if needed.
Sorry, guys, I can talk for Italy, as you can tell, but that's a.
Well, why don't we wrap it there, and then we can dive into our notes and come up with a good round 2 in the near future.
No, absolutely. I'd be very happy to come again. So maybe with some more specific question. Maybe we can discuss some ideas for some studies, or identify from you guys who are practitioners and athletes and coaches, maybe where the knowledge gaps are. That would be also interesting for me to learn from you guys, where could be some knowledge gaps that maybe we can fill with some science.
Well, I think the one, as a good maybe final piece, I think the one knowledge gap, which I'm glad you guys are going to start trying to do some research, is I don't think people know, and myself included, really well, like what is happening when you are engaging in CrossFit style activities, and how that engagement from both a physiological and a psychological perspective ought to influence the training process to make you better at it. Because with endurance, we know what's happening when you engage in it on both of those dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And with strength and weightlifting, we know what's happening. But in CrossFit, it's gray, and I don't think anybody has a really good answer yet. So that's something that is still to be determined or better understood.
Mm-hmm. I agree, because there are some studies I've read a few, like acute responses to different metcons, and I think we need to find maybe a different way to study CrossFit, because of just measuring heart rate and VO2 and stuff. Because when you look at those data, it's not that impressive. I mean, it's okay.
No.
If you do,
800 you can't reach if I had you do 60 push-ups in a row, you'll reach fatigue, but your heart rate's not going to max.
So it's this combination that needs a little bit of a complex activity, complex measurements to try to get the angle of it. But absolutely, and it's something that especially I think at the beginning I will concentrate on the ventilation, because that's what really is of interest to me, and then maybe move on also to other things. But it definitely, also because the limiting factor in the other more pure, more simple, let's say, disciplines are kind of clear, they're always the same. I think in CrossFit it can be obviously different for different workouts, but can also be different within the workout. And also same workout, different people is in elite athletes, the same workout is probably more of an endurance activity, is limited by perception of effort. In lower level, no, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about really good athletes, but lower level maybe is a muscle fatigue thing. So it's complex, but very interesting also from a scientific point of view, apart from being fun to do it, to get a bit fitter at this old age of mine.
Awesome. All right. Well, I got some good notes. I got some stuff to go look up for hopefully our next episode. We really appreciate your time, and I hope all the listeners, learn something, or at least maybe got an itch to go learn and do some digging of their own to try and improve their coaching practice or their performance. So again, we thank you to all the listeners. Sam, anything to add?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your time. And if people wanted to learn more about you or find you, where could they do that?
Well, I was quite active on Twitter, but not anymore, to be honest. But they could reach me there. But what I would suggest, there are a couple of one we mentioned already. How Bad Do You Want It by Matt Fitzgerald. But I also want to give a shout out to Endure by Alex Hutchinson. They are primarily for endurance athletes. By again, endurance is important for CrossFitters as well. But they're also nice because there are stories about athletes. They put science into it, but they're very engaging with a lot of stories, and you will learn because they discuss 60-70% of what they're talking about is from a scientific point of view is my research. So you can also get maybe more digestible compared to the book that you shown, and also engaging to read a lot of stories about different athletes, different events in the history of triathlon and endurance performance. So those two, I think, would be my recommendations.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, great books. Really good books.
Awesome.
Well,
All right, I'll end the recording. Thank you, everyone, again for listening. And if you have any questions, you can message us or you can to reach out to the doc yourself. So thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.